Please subscribe to the USX Stories channel. The hallway was a river that never stopped moving. Boots, voices, flickers of radios, the smell of coffee and oil. She moved through it with an armful of paperwork pressed tight to her chest, careful not to drop anything, careful not to take up space. Someone brushed past and barely noticed. Another bumped her shoulder, muttered an apology that sounded more like impatience. A couple of younger troops laughed under their breath, convinced they were being subtle. Paperwork girl, admin only. She didn't react. She adjusted her grip, tucked her chin, kept walking. The work had to reach the next office, the next signature, the next decision that everyone would assume just appeared out of nowhere. As she paused at the door, the light shifted. For a moment, the bracelet at her wrist slipped against her skin, and something metallic flashed beneath it, sharp, deliberate, out of place in the blur of daily routine. No one noticed. The jokes kept floating, soft and careless. The hallway swallowed her again, but the camera would stay on the wrist a fraction longer than the crowd did, like a question forming in the dark, like the quiet before someone realizes they should have been paying attention all along. Sarah Mitchell worked where the maps lived, where routes were drawn and redrawn until they stopped looking like lines and started looking like chances. On paper, she was a logistics and operations coordinator. In practice, she was the quiet person in the corner who made sure the right trucks moved at the right hour so that someone else didn't have to pay for a mistake. People knew her, but only in the way you know a piece of furniture that never breaks. Always there, always working, easy to forget. She spoke softly, rarely raised her voice, and finished tasks before anyone remembered assigning them. That made her useful, and it made her invisible. Most saw nothing beyond the paperwork and the comm. Admin helped they called her when they thought she couldn't hear. Paper pusher. Nice, polite, harmless. No one asked about the years before logistics. She never volunteered them. There had been a medical evacuation unit, a forward deployment, and a night she still carried with her stitched into silence. The guilt lived like a stone underwater, never seen, always present. She avoided the wall of photos and plaques, the ceremonial places that made people sentimental. She had seen enough ceremony in real time. Her mother kept telling her to find something safer, something quieter. Her brother told her he was proud, then changed the subject, as if pride was easier than understanding. Sarah pretended that all of it rolled off. On the surface, she was steady weather. Underneath, the storm never fully cleared. Commanders noticed what others didn't. They slid complicated routing problems across her desk and didn't explain why. She solved them, thanked them, and moved on. She never demanded credit. That made some coworkers uneasy and others bold enough to laugh at how kind she was. She wore a plain bracelet every day, silver and unremarkable like a habit. She never took it off. Now and then when she adjusted her sleeve, there was a brief flash of something heavier beneath it. People missed it. They kept seeing the paperwork, the quiet voice, the woman who never argued. They did not see what she chose to carry. Not yet. The alert cut through the base like a blade. Phones lit up. Radios snapped from idle chatter to clip commands. Sarah looked up from a stack of manifests just as the operations screen flooded with red markers. A convoy that should have been well past danger was suddenly reporting contact. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong coordinates entirely. Voices overlapped as the operations room filled. A new officer, still getting used to the seat, but eager to look decisive, took charge. He waved off questions, called for updates, began pushing instructions through the system. Sarah's eyes stayed on the map. The route on the screen wasn't the one she had planned. Somewhere between approval and execution, it had been overridden. Static bled through the radios. When voices punched through, they came with gunfire in the background. The convoy had driven straight into a narrow valley with perfect sight lines for anyone waiting. A textbook kill zone. Sarah felt the air thin. She had seen this shape before, though it had been through a helicopter window then. With wounded strapped to the floor, the room tilted toward panic. Everyone moved at once, but nothing moved forward. Orders contradicted each other. Reports stuttered and vanished. Someone cursed the radios. Someone else blamed the mapping software. Sarah traced a digital route with one finger, following the exact decision point where the mistake had been made. She knew what had happened. She knew how fast it could get worse. She stepped closer to the main display and spoke, keeping her voice even. The officer barely turned. He gave a short laugh, the kind meant to put a subordinate back in their place. Logistics, he said. Paperwork. Stay in your lane. For a second, she almost obeyed. Habit is powerful, but the memory of another valley pushed back. Dust, rotor wash, a medic shouting over blades, a delay that still haunted her. She felt the bracelet on her wrist cool against her skin. She raised her voice, not loud, just steady enough to cut through the noise. The route was wrong. The coordinates were wrong. If they didn't change course now, men and women would die, not numbers on a spreadsheet. People. Sarah leaned over the console and pulled up the satellite logs herself. The newer feeds glitched under the load, but the archive sweep still painted the terrain honestly. She zoomed out, then back in, tracing elevation lines until the shape of the land revealed what the blinking icons did not. A narrow funnel, natural choke points, high ridges that gave any waiting force the high ground for free. She tried again to relay the assessment. The reply came back through layers of rank, filtered until it meant nothing. The officer at the center of it all repeated his earlier dismissal, this time with a hint of irritation. A couple of younger troops, standing off to the side, exchanged looks and smirked. Paperwork girl, worrying about hills. The room separated itself into two unspoken camps. Those who thought authority made reality behave, and those who knew better. Sarah's breath slowed as the convoy's calls grew more frantic. She heard the echo of another voice from years ago, shouting over the roar of rotors, begging for pain meds, counting the wounded, losing count, starting again. She saw a stretcher tilt, a hand slip, a medic cry behind their mask when no one was looking. The presence snapped back in with a harsh edge of gunfire over the speakers. The radio sputtered. The convoy leader tried to report their position, only to be swallowed by static. Someone punched a console. Someone else suggested waiting for a clearer signal. Sarah felt time stretching thinner by the second. She slid into an unused terminal, bypassed the main routing interface, and opened a secure backup channel she still remembered from a deployment no one ever asked her about. The door opened hard. A senior colonel stepped in, jaw set, eyes scanning for control. The new officer straightened instantly and began explaining. Too fast, too defensive. He blamed software lag, weather interference, a cascade of bad luck. Nothing about his own override. Sarah spoke over him. Not loud, just precise. Terrain funnel. Kill zone. Alternate route available. The room stalled. Then a few laughs, short, uneasy. The officer started to wave her away, but she was already typing, pulling up layered maps, traffic data, convoy fuel estimates. The bracelet on her wrist slid against her skin, slowing her fingers, and she tugged it off without thinking. It clinked on the console. Beneath it, the metal hung on a thin chain, worn, scratched, impossible to mistake if you'd ever read citation. Someone near the back inhaled sharply. A whisper moved through the line of NCOs like a current. The colonel's gaze dropped to the metal, then rose to Sarah's face. Where did you learn this pattern? She answered in fragments. Old Valley Road. Insurgent triangulation. Decoy fire to draw vehicles into the choke. She pointed to the satellite image and traced the likely fallback point where the ambushers would regroup. She was not telling a story. She was assembling a threat from pieces. The colonel glanced at the officer, then at the bleeding icons on the map. The decision sat heavy between protocol and survival. Every update carried another fragment of loss. A tire blown, a driver hit, a vehicle immobilized. The room thickened with dread. Sarah steadied herself. If the reroute failed, she would sign the report. She would carry that, too. But if they did nothing, the outcome was already written. A grizzled sergeant stepped forward and said the data matched what he'd seen downrange. Another nodded. The colonel exhaled slow, then gave the order. Emergency reroute. Push it now. The corridor she proposed was barely scouted, winding through broken terrain that maps treated like an afterthought. If there were mines, they'd find out too late. If the enemy anticipated it, the convoy would be boxed in with no exit. time compressed into beats. The reroute message went through the backup channel. Crackling acknowledgments came back clipped and strained over the speakers. The firefight surged and faded, then surged again. Screams riding the static like ghosts. Sarah kept her eyes on the map, one hand resting unconsciously where the bracelet had been. The metal swung gently against her wrist as she worked. Her voice stayed even, calling distances, angles, checkpoints. It wasn't bravado. It was a strange calm that arrives when the worst thing in your memory becomes a guide instead of a weight. The convoy began to pivot one vehicle at a time, like a long body trying to turn itself away from pain. On the screen, the icons hesitated, then shifted along the thin gray vein of road she had marked. For a moment, nothing changed except the direction of their fear. Then the first trap snapped shut behind them. Sensors picked up pressure detonations along the abandoned route. Dust bloomed in ugly bursts, exactly where they would have been if the override had held. The operators in the room fell quiet, watching the blast ripple in sequence like a line of teeth trying to bite air. The enemy had expected obedience, not improvisation. Sarah traced a new path ahead. The land pressed close, then opened, then narrowed again. Twice the convoy brushed the edge of positions cleverly hidden in brush and broken masonry. Twice they slipped past before the ambushers realized their targets were gone. A delayed burst of small arms fire crackled uselessly behind them. One last vehicle lagged. A mechanical warning flashed. The driver struggled to keep speed as the road curved toward a shallow basin, one of the few places the enemy could still box them. Sarah's breath hitched. She saw it a second before the patterns resolved on everyone else's screens. She called the turn early. Just a few seconds. Just enough. The vehicle jerked out of the basin, skidded, righted itself, and barreled forward. A heartbeat later, an explosive tore a crater where its rear tires had been. The room exhaled as if they had all been underwater. Across the monitors, the convoy climbed out of the valley, battered but intact. Voices on the radio changed timbre, ragged, shaken, alive. The colonel straightened slowly. He turned to the officer who had overridden the original plan. There was no shouting, just a measured question, and then another, and then the stillness that comes when responsibility lands on the right shoulders. At last, the officer tried to talk around it, then stopped. There was nowhere to hide. The colonel faced Sarah next. His voice dropped not softer, but steadier. He asked her to step forward. He nodded at the chain on her wrist and asked what it was. No ceremony, no theatrics, just the truth. She told him a Valor award from an evacuation mission that had gone wrong and then worse. She had stayed on the ground when the call to lift had come, staying until the last wounded were on board. Not all of them had made it. She didn't say their names. She didn't explain the nightmares. She simply stated the facts like entries in a log. Silence layered the room. The NCO stood a little straighter. The laughter that had lingered earlier had evaporated entirely, leaving something heavier behind. Respect mixed with regret. The colonel gave a single formal acknowledgement. Not praise, not applause, just recognition. And in that quiet, the balance shifted. She had not demanded it. She had not asked for it. But the room understood who had carried the weight when it mattered. The aftermath unfolded without ceremony. The report was compiled. The timelines reconstructed. The choices laid bare. The officer who had overridden her plan stood through a formal review that moved with patient, unhurried precision. The conclusion was unavoidable. He wasn't ruined, but he was removed from the chair, sent to retraining with a notation that would follow him longer than he expected. Consequences, not vengeance. The colonel moved faster on the next part. A new protocol went out before sunset. Logistics and operations planning would sit in the same real-time loop as tactical command. No more silent approvals that could be quietly altered. No more paperwork mistaken for background noise. The memo was dry, only a paragraph long, but the shift to create was anything but small. Around the base, people changed how they walked past Sarah. Some stopped to offer awkward gratitude in half-sentences. Others couldn't quite meet her eyes and chose to nod instead. A few said nothing at all, but their silence had a different weight now. Days later, a handful of the convoy survivors found their way into the logistics office. They didn't bring gifts or speeches. One shook her hand longer than was comfortable and said, "Thank you," once. Another sat down, cried for a minute, wiped their face, and apologized for taking up space. She told them it was fine. It was. When they left, the relief that washed through her came with its shadow. The memories stirred up, the faces from the old mission that hadn't walked through any door. She wrote the incident report with the same restraint she always used. Clear, factual, minimal commentary. It was the only way she knew how to keep the story from growing teeth. Before heading out, she slipped the bracelet back over her wrist, covering the metal again, not out of shame. It wasn't meant to be a signal. It was a reminder, and reminders are personal. The bass returned to its rhythms, but a note of respect hummed beneath it now. The noise was quieter, the jokes were fewer, and the air around Sarah felt different, as if people finally understood that the calm she carried wasn't emptiness. It was earned. In the weeks that followed, change arrived in small, almost invisible increments. Meetings that once brushed past logistics now paused to ask questions. Plans were double-checked, routes walked through aloud, and when trouble flickered on a screen, someone always asked where Sarah was before the room moved on. Trust built itself quietly, brick by brick, the way she worked. The metal stayed hidden beneath the bracelet. It wasn't a trophy. It was a weight she had learned to carry, without letting it define her. When people hinted at hearing the whole story, she simply shook her head and steered the conversation back to the task in front of them. One morning, she walked the same hallway where the jokes had once followed her. Papers in her hands, radios humming, boots moving fast. This time, no one bumped her aside. A few stepped out of the way. No applause, no speeches, just recognition in passing. She didn't change her stride. Quiet professionals rarely do. Please subscribe to the USX Stories channel.